Thank you so much for joining. If you weren't here earlier at the beginning, I just want to offer a warm welcome to everyone from AFI. Found out that you're all about to graduate soon in cinematography from AFI, so really excited for you. It's a crazy world, but I want to let you leave today with the message that you are going to be the people who change the future of cinematography. So thank you for that, and we're counting on you. The future depends on you. We want to make the world of cinematography the best possible place for all people. Keep telling human stories. Keep making life beautiful, interesting, rewarding, and that's really what we're all about here at Atlas Lens Co. So without further ado, I'm going to kick off my presentation called Commerce, Technology, and Artistry, or Third Order Consequences of the Cinematic Kind. So there's three spheres of influence that make up movies: commerce, technology, and artistry. So these three spheres are interconnected and inextricably linked with one another. And I speed ran the first part, but I'm going to jump back to it. And maybe these things will all start to kind of make sense about how they're interconnected and how something that happens in one sphere may have unexpected consequences in the third sphere. So commerce is the financial engine of our artistic medium. Without money, there are no movies. Technology, how many of you have ever heard of the Lascaux Caves? Those are caves, ancient caves in France, thousands of years old. And when scientists first went to these caves, they saw drawings on the cave walls of bison, wolves, people with spears. But the most unusual thing about these cave paintings is that all of the cave paintings had 4 sets of limbs. And for the longest time, people that went to these caves couldn't figure out why they were drawing people with so many sets of limbs in so many different poses overlapped. And one of the theories that they came up with was that the people had taken some kind of psychedelic mushrooms and gone into the caves to paint these paintings, and that's why the pictures were so psychedelic. But it wasn't until later that some of the anthropologists went into the cave with flickering fire torches that they realized that the purpose of these drawings on the cave walls were to be animated by fire. And so we can say that motion picture technology has been with us for a very long time, because fire is technology. It's a very primitive technology, but in the hands of people, it's an important technology. And the core thing is that this is technology used to tell a story, the story of those people who lived in Lascaux, France, thousands and thousands of years ago. And finally, artistry, which is one of the most enjoyable and fun parts. It's our ability to tell stories about humankind with as much fidelity, magic, or nuance as we seek to communicate an idea. And that's the most human part of filmmaking and about what we do. So we'll jump back and we'll talk a little bit about anamorphic movies, because I speed ran this part. So as I was saying when we all first got here, I think the reason all of us are here today is that we all love movies and we all love storytelling. And many of you shared some of your favorite movies. Some of my favorite movies growing up were Raiders of the Lost Ark by Douglas Slocum, BSc, the camera person. Close Encounters of the Third Kind, of course. Blade Runner. And another movie that made me stand up and ask a big important question, which is why? Why do all these movies have something in common? And what is it about these movies visually, despite the fact that they're all about very, very different subject matter in different time periods with different qualities? What is the interconnecting link between all these movies, and why do I personally find so much joy visually in that style of storytelling? And that movie for me was Punch Drunk Love, which is the beautiful work of Robert Elswit, ASC, directed by Paul Thomas Anderson, and of course with one of my favorite all-time actors, Adam Sandler. So what do these movies have in common? All of these movies were made using anamorphic lenses, and not just any anamorphic lenses. Most of them were made using Panavision anamorphic lenses. So when I watched this movie in the theaters in 2002, I said, damn, I love the way that movie looks. I wish I could make pictures that look like this movie. And I didn't have access to a movie camera at all. So no kind of movie camera was attainable for me in 2002. No film stock, nothing. But I did have a Minolta stills camera, and I loved taking pictures and developing them and making all kinds of portraits and telling visual essay stories with stills. And I thought, how can I make stills of my friends that look like this movie? So I thought, well, I'm going to do a little bit of a research deep dive, and I found out, okay, PTA and Robert Ellswood ASC, they used anamorphic lenses. And then I said, well, what is an anamorphic lens, and how can I put that on my Minolta stills camera? And there was no apparent clear answer, because anamorphic lenses were reserved only for the very top of the echelon in cinematography, and they were only available for rental. And I didn't have any budget. I was trying to do a personal essay project in still photography, and that's a big mismatch between the way that this movie was made technically. So I said, well, you know, if I can't have access to this type of lens, at least I can learn more about it, because apparently all of my favorite movies use this type of lens, an anamorphic lens. So I went on a research deep dive that lasted about 20 years and brought us up until this point, and I'm still researching every week. So one thing I want to leave you with, if nothing else today, besides the fact that all of you are going to change cinematography, is that you have the ability after you leave school to become lifelong learners and promote that idea of lifelong progress, development, thinking, research, communication, and onward progress to all of your camera assistants, all of your crew, all of your families, everyone you come in contact with. You can be that source of inspiration for others. We may be in very adverse times, whether we're on a film set and we're working at 3 a.m. and it's raining and it's freezing and there's no craft service, or we just may not have a job at all because things are rough. But all of us have that spark, all of us have that fire, and we can light the torch of the future of filmmaking and storytelling. And I want you all to leave today with that fire inside you and light it for all of your people that you come in contact with. Because that's what this movie and all of those movies did for me. The best of the past of cinematography brought us here today, and I hope to carry that torch forward into the future, just like those people in that cave thousands of years ago. So another more recent Adam Sandler film, also shot on anamorphic lenses by the great Darius Khanji, AFC, Uncut Gems. And of course, another anamorphic classic. And more recently, another great anamorphic film, The Creator, which we were fortunate enough to not only have our lenses chosen to be used on the film alongside Kowa vintage anamorphic lenses, they chose to use our Mercury 42mm anamorphic lens for all of the wide shots in the movie. But interestingly enough, that particular family of lenses was developed along the needs of Gareth Edwards, who's the director of the film, who'd been talking about a film when we first met him at NAB in 2017. We didn't know what the movie was going to be. All we knew was that we loved Gareth's work, we loved Greg Fraser's work, and Gareth was talking about making a future movie with as lightweight and small and compact and as quick moving a tools as possible. And we said that vision for the future of filmmaking aligns closely with our vision and our outlook for the future of anamorphic cinematography. How can we make lenses lighter, smaller, easier to use in a quick way to make movies that look like the biggest budget movies in the world, but allow you to move quickly, easily, and in a lightweight way that allows us to be adaptable to harsh environments and difficult situations. So getting to the question, and what and why, what does the term anamorphic mean? The term anamorphic means to intentionally distort or change shape. And the concept of anamorphosis is a Greek terminology, and it dates back to ancient art history well before cinematography, just like those ancient cave paintings. You can see this beautiful chalk art and it looks like these young ladies are standing on a three-dimensional space, but it's just a simple two-dimensional, it's not simple, but it's beautiful, two-dimensional sidewalk chalk. But if you looked at this from a top-down perspective, this would be incredibly skewed and distorted looking. So I don't know if anyone's ever experienced these kind of anamorphic sidewalk chalk drawings, but it's the idea of intentional distortion in order to tell a visual story. And it creates a compelling and unusual visual. And that's one of the magical properties of an anamorphic lens that dates back to ancient art history. So we already got through the key 3 spheres that make up what we do. So why do we have anamorphic cinema lenses? If we have anamorphosis in ancient art history to reshape something, to create a different type of storytelling or create a different visual, it dates back to the mid-1950s, where people had stopped going to the movie theater because of the Netflix of their time. So if you can imagine, instead of going out to the movie theater where you have to pay for your parking, you have to pay for a hot dog, soda, and popcorn for your family, and you have to buy all the tickets, you don't have to leave your house. You just sit down on the couch, turn on the TV, and you have classic movies rerunning on the TV. That, by the way, the TV stations aren't paying license fees to the studios or the distributors of the original film negatives. You're not going to leave the house. You're just going to sit at home and watch the Netflix of the time. And you can see there's an interesting parallel. You can kind of begin to get a clear picture about what our present condition is and even some of the future by looking at the past. So they weren't paying people royalties for the films that they'd created. They were just basically pirating movies to air and not paying residuals to the actors or the writers or the studios. And so this was creating a big financial problem. Does that sound familiar? Are we all familiar with the strikes that recently happened that set all of our work back and kind of held us from doing our job for a while? Well, this is very similar. All of it also relates because people started distributing entertainment and content on Netflix, but they didn't think about the back end of all of the people like us who make the movies and how it would affect us, all in the name of a new type of profit. Which I'm not saying it's evil. We all need Netflix content. We need more content. We need more films in general. But sometimes the economic mechanism hasn't yet been figured out in a way that is equitable to all the people. So sometimes you can't put the cart before the horse. So if we look back to that time, this was great for the consumer. People were watching TV at home, not paying for movies. The TV stations weren't paying the license fees for the old movies that they were rerunning for free. And theaters and studio chains began to worry. So this is the business people, the commerce people, again, the financial engine of our medium. The studios and the theater chains said, hey, we need to get people back into the movies. What is something that has always worked to get people into the movies? And they said, well, you know what's always worked is the sense of spectacle. Even with the very first silent movies like The Great Train Robbery, where you see the train coming right at the screen, people would go to the water cooler the next day at work and say, you would not believe what happened to me at the movies last night. A train almost hit us. You have to see it too. So you could say that was viral marketing. The people at that time were telling their friends, the movies are the place to see this crazy thing. You got to get down there, spend your money, go entertain yourself, and then we can talk about it more at the water cooler the next day. And believe me, the studio heads were well aware of this idea, and they said, we need to create a sense of spectacle that makes people feel like they're in the movie, so that the only place you can really experience this is at the movie theater. So they came up with a couple ideas when they talked to their technical departments at the studios. They said, well, one of the things we've talked about is immersive movies, like 3D glasses. We could try that. And they're like, yeah, but then you're going to have to make glasses. And then there's all this complication with like trying to get the feed into each eye with the colors, and it doesn't really work that great, and people hate wearing glasses at the movies. And they said, well, what's really popular is like surround sound. So people are buying these records at home, and having listening parties in their house where they'd put on a record that's like a bunch of parrots and tigers in the jungle. And they're like, dude, it's like we're in the jungle right now. This is so crazy. It's immersive. So you could say that some of this is a precursor to virtual reality and sort of an out-of-body experience like people are experiencing now with meta headsets and what have you. And it's spectacular. It's unusual. It's a different experience, and it's going to make people spend money. So they said, well, maybe we can make it like you're in the movie and the movie surrounds you, just like the sound from these stereo records. So they thought, well, we'll make a big curved screen and then put the people in the middle of the theater, and you feel like the whole movie is around you and you're in this movie. And I'm like, that sounds great. Let's try it. And they said, well, how are we going to get such a panoramic movie? And the technical people said, oh, that's easy. We'll just get 3 cameras and we'll run 3 strips of film, and we'll just have like 3 times as many operators, 3 times as many camera assistants, and then we're going to process the film, and then we'll run it on 3 projectors. And I said, well, that sounds kind of expensive, but you know what? We'll try it and we'll see if people like it. So they did, and that was called Cinerama. So have any of you ever been fortunate enough to go to the Cinerama Dome before they shut it down, the ArcLight? Well, here's knocking on wood to hoping that the Cinerama Dome comes back, because it's a big part of Hollywood history. And hopefully in the near future, we'll all be back in the Cinerama Dome seeing a movie on a big curved screen. But if not, you can see it. It's not that far from AFI. So they did this, and they booked out the Cinerama projections for over a year in advance. And the studio had said, hey, this is financially viable. We've got people going to the movies. But there's one problem. The payroll for that movie was huge, because we had to run way more people on the set. We had to process way more film. And then we keep getting these calls from the projectionists saying, we can't synchronize the 3 projectors. This is really difficult. And so there'd be like technical intermissions trying to make it work correctly. So they went back to the technical people at the studio and said, yeah, like that's working pretty good, but does anybody have any other ideas about how we could do this with just 1 normal strip of film, 1 normal camera, and 1 projector, and we can take it all around the country? Because right now, all the theater owners don't want to equip with 3 extra projectors and a curved screen and all this extra stuff that's expensive to outfit when profits are already down. And they said, well, yeah, we were taking note when this one French guy, Henri Chrétien, was talking about how he'd built a telescope somehow that he'd put in front of the camera that would make a wide-angle field of view. I said, well, that sounds pretty interesting. Did the guy patent it? And they said, yeah, but his patent's about to run out. And word got around in Hollywood, and they said, well, we got to fly over to France and meet Henri Chrétien and talk to him about this thing that he called hypergonar, which means hypergonar, which means big stretcher. So they went to talk to Henri Chrétien right before his patent was going to expire. And notoriously, the people from 20th Century Fox and Warner Brothers were like racing to get to Henri Chrétien. And he lived outside of Paris, so he was in an area called St. Cloud. So they got to St. Cloud, they met with Henri Chrétien, and he's like, yeah, I invented this. He was very old by that time. He was like in his late 80s. And he said, oh yeah, like I invented this during World War I. It was so that, we had a tank with a periscope, but it was only a monocular periscope. And it would let us know if the Germans were going to throw grenades at us from the left or the right. And we only had 1 eyepiece. And they're like, that's interesting, but like, what does that have to do with movies? And he said, well, yeah, I tried to sell it to a bunch of other French people to make movies in widescreen, because, not only is it good for protecting us from grenades, but it will also let us make panoramic movies. And they're like, that's exactly why we're here to see you. So can we license this technology? And sure enough, 20th Century Fox licensed the technology and brought it to America in 1952 and started making a movie before they even finished the technical part. They just used his hypergonar attachment in front of a regular Bosch and Lone Baltar lens, and they made a movie called The Robe, and they started screening it pretty quickly, and they advertised it as CinemaScope because he talked about the telescope, an anamorphic telescope. So they marketed CinemaScope, and the branding is very solid. And they're like, oh, if you like those widescreen panoramic movies that are immersive, you're going to love this. And sure enough, people did love it. And so really quickly, we'll talk about exactly what that Hypergonar scope does to the picture. So when you think of a telescope, you think of it magnifying the picture, right? So you put a telescope up to your eye and it's magnifying a close-up of someone. Chrétien's design was an inverse telescope. So it was like a wide-angle telescope. So you look at something and it makes everything wider. But the only thing that makes his extra unique is that it only makes it wider in one direction. So you can see on this film strip here, they wanted to use a regular 4-perf piece of film that's a 4:3 aspect ratio, and then make a panoramic picture on that film. And so Chrétien's scope would take twice as wide of a horizontal field of view and squeeze it down onto a square piece of film. So you'd have a circle become an oval that's twice as tall as it is wide, just like you see here. And then you'd use the same type of lens scope on the projector side. So the distribution method was the same as the capture method. So I'm sure all of you are familiar with a codec, right? The idea of a codec, H.264, ProRes. A codec is a compressor and a decompressor. So in a way, this anamorphic technology was one of the very first hardware codecs, an optical codec. It's compressing a wide-angle field of view onto a square piece of film and then decompressing it back out for a panoramic theater projection. And here's the picture of Henri Chrétien with his scopes, and then a couple of the Fox studio heads here, and he's explaining it. And this little square box is the Hypergonar. And recently, we had the chance to, myself and a few of our colleagues here at the company, got to go to France, to the home of anamorphic cinematography. What a special trip that was. It was really unbelievable. Got to talk to a lot of people. Some of them had even met Henri Chrétien, and many of them continue to make great movies in France in anamorphic, using our lenses, using French anamorphic lenses. It was a really special trip. So we talked so far about how commerce affected the technology, and then technology affected commerce. So it got people back into the movies, and then people were complaining about the way that that technology was working, so they complained again to the technical people, and that changed the way the technology worked. And now we're going to get into how the technology affected the artists, because there's more to the story. So one thing to consider is that all of this process changed the way lenses were designed and manufactured. So we showed Chrétien's Hypergonar, which was very difficult to use because you'd have to focus your primary lens, and then you'd focus the anamorphic group, which would go in front of that, but in the opposite direction. So needless to say, camera assistants at the time were sweating when they would show dailies and go smoking and sweating and going, I hope I didn't buzz focus on that. They're going to fire me. Everyone was freaking out, and stress is not good for art most of the time. So it was freaking a lot of people out. They complained to the technical people and the business people and said, we need to do something about this. It's making it very difficult to make movies. So the people at Bosch and Lone, which were contracted, the #1 American lens manufacturer at the time, they were contracted to build these CinemaScope lenses in America. And they actually used computer-aided design to generate the second version of these CinemaScope lenses. So they actually integrated the anamorphic lens with the primary lens, and they had an easy-to-use crank on the side for doing follow focus. So it made it really easy for them from an artistic and technical standpoint to pull focus and try to keep things lined up. And if you can believe it, at the time, most of the cameras in the world were not even reflex viewfinder cameras. So you were never seeing the image that the actual lens was putting to film. They'd have to have a lineup. So you see pictures of people going around like this, right? You go to Universal Studios today and they have a statue of a guy going like this. And we all make fun of it because it seems corny. But at the time, that was actually how they would do frame finding for the movie. So the director would go out, put their hands up like this, and then they'd pull the big rack over camera into place and put the camera where his hands were or her hands were and frame it that way. And they'd have to do that lineup with a parallax finder. So the director or the DP would never see exactly what the actual lens was seeing. So if you can imagine how difficult that was, it's amazing to look back at all those classic movies and realize they were using a parallax finder without a reflex viewfinder system. Pretty crazy stuff. So these are actually some of the very first computer-aided design lenses. We actually have them here in the Anamorphic History Lens Museum. And recently, Darius Kanji actually used some of the lenses from the museum on a new movie coming out called Marty Supreme. And I did my best to convince him not to use those lenses because it was going to be very difficult to use. But they used them anyway. The new Marty Supreme movie. So shout out. We'll have to see what Darius thought after. We'll have to all go see the movie, right, in the theater. Okay, so the lenses are still alive. They're in this building, and they just made a movie this last year. So, and you can actually look at them today on a camera. So they thought they'd solved all of the problems, all the business problems, all the technical problems, all of the creative problems, but there were a few creative problems that were not solved in this process. And one of those chief problems were that when you would do a close-up of someone, they would go from looking like this to looking like this. And that's because the anamorphic compression ratio would change as you moved into close-up on the focus system of the lens. So this was something that, even though they had computer-aided design, they'd had a couple years to think about it, they hadn't solved this problem. And so we had a financial problem that changed technology. Technology changed the financial medium. That changed the artistic medium. And there were still people that were unhappy because the creativity was being hampered by how bad it made some of the directors of photography look, how bad it made some of the actors and actresses look. And so they said, well, we need to come up with a solution. So one of the groups of people that came up with a solution for this problem were Panavision. A whole business had started because there was so much demand for these movies to be projected in theaters that Bausch & Lomb couldn't produce enough projection lenses to fulfill the demand for screenings for CinemaScope movies. So Panavision came and said, we can make less expensive projector lenses. So they made them with prisms instead of with cylindrically shaped glass. So a prism is a less expensive piece of glass that's angular, and the deflection between the two angular pieces changes the compression ratio. And in that process, they also determined that if they adjust the angle of those prisms, they can also adjust the ratio of compression in real time during the projection of a movie. So people who would buy these variable projector lenses would have notes for the movie, and the projectionist would be like a DJ up in the projection booth watching the movie and then turning the knobs on the projector lens to change the squeeze ratio of the projection in real time. So they're up there smoking in the projection room, you know, DJing the movie and having a great job and a great life. And most people didn't notice, but it was also kind of upsetting other people. So eventually, camera people got word of these projector lenses and said, well, if you can solve it on the projector side, why can't we solve this on the camera side? And so the people at Panavision started looking at solutions that would allow them to modify the existing lenses so that they could get good close-ups without what they called the mumps. And so some of the very clever people that worked at Panavision came up with a solution to use a pair of twisting cylindrical lenses that would twist in conjunction with the focus of the lens and increase the compression ratio in a close-up. They patented that technology, and that became the dominant mechanism for cinematography for the next 50 or so years after that. And that's why all those movies that I referenced at the beginning that I love so much were most likely, most of the time, made with Panavision lenses. So Americans and Panavision and Bausch & Lomb weren't the only people who saw how important panoramic movie making was. You also had people in Japan and the Soviet Union all vying for supremacy in making panoramic movies. And so you had people in the former Soviet Union making Lomo anamorphic lenses. You had the people at Kowa and Nippon Scope making anamorphic lenses for Japan. And really, anamorphic cinematography became the worldwide language. America, the Soviet Union, Japan, Germany, the worldwide anamorphic became the primary medium of cinema. So one thing that we have to acknowledge is no lens is perfect, and once you start complicating a lens with all this anamorphic stuff, it only makes it technically worse. So again, you have a business need that changed technology. Technology changed the artistry. Artistry changed the technology. And at the end of it, what we're left with is technology that mostly works, but may have certain imperfections that leave tool marks in the image. So just like people who love tube amplifiers when they're listening to vinyl records, many of us love the imperfections and aesthetic qualities of an anamorphic lens in cinematography. So today, we don't technically need an anamorphic lens to make a panoramic movie at all. A lot of camera sensors are widescreen. You also have film-based solutions like IMAX, where you have a big strip of film, very wide. And so those are great ways of making panoramic movies. But there are qualifiers that make them inherently different from the imperfect and natural beauty of an anamorphic lens. So as we were talking about earlier, some of those imperfections or aberrations are oval-shaped bokeh, streak flares, and astigmatism, which is the inability for an eye or a lens to focus vertically and horizontally at the same time. So I don't know if anyone here has astigmatism in their eyes, but that's something that can be corrected with glasses. It has to do with the shape of our human lenses, just like the shape of an anamorphic camera lens has a cylindrical shape to it. Astigmatism is a byproduct of that shape that exists in the lens, and you can't correct all of it out no matter what in a camera lens. So you have that astigmatism, you have coma, which is kind of a streaking of the out of focus image area or the in focus image area, and other aberrations like chromatic aberration, spherical aberration, which some people like to call glow, or like a microphone. Thanks. I'll get better at this eventually. Yeah, and the thing I would argue is that anamorphic cinematography now is the native language of cinema. So even though we can make great movies without an anamorphic lens, we can make great widescreen movies without an anamorphic lens, many of us still prefer the imperfections of an anamorphic lens as part of the invisible craft of the storytelling. So I'm going to try to speed run this part because I can tell this has gone on pretty long, and then I want to open it up for questions. But you might be wondering, well, what is all that stuff that just happened in the past? How do we end up here at Atlas today making anamorphic lenses? So I'm going to speed run this. But what I like to say is Atlas Anamorphic is about putting the world of cinematography in your hands. And at the beginning of this company, which started effectively around 2015 in stealth, anamorphic lenses were unattainable for the average person, period. Unless you had a huge budget for rental or unless you were well connected, you were not going to have an easy time getting access to an anamorphic lens to make your project. And I was that camera person still from back in 2002 who had started as a grip and then a set lighting technician, and then a gaffer, and then a digital imaging technician, and then a company founder making an HD transmitter. And then after leaving that, I said, what do I want to make next? I want to make the kind of lenses that I want to use. How could we do that? So that's why we built Atlas Lens Co. Has anyone here ever heard of the term Ikigai? So Ikigai is the concept of a well-rounded life. And our concept as a company is to be well-rounded and create a well-rounded life for anyone in the camera department or in the art of movie making. So the idea of Ikigai is about 4 quadrants. What can you do well? What do you enjoy doing? What can you get paid to do? There's one more. I'll get to it. But you can be really good at something but hate doing it. What do you like doing? So do you like doing something or do you hate doing something? You could be really good at something and hate doing it. You could be really good at something and not get paid for it. The 4th quadrant, what does the world need? So filling a need for others or for the entire world. That's the 4th quadrant. So you could love doing something, but it's useless to the world at large. So it's, you could be very strong. You could be very high level in one area of these quadrants and weak in the others. But the idea of Atlas is to bring balance to all the quadrants. And so our Ikigai of lenses is what has high optical performance for the type of lens that we want to make. Not perfect, but high quality. How can we make it affordable to a modern generation of filmmakers that may not have had access to this type of lens ever? How can we make it work well and be reliable and durable on set in adverse environments and conditions? And how can we actually build it? Because you could design the perfect lens and never make it. So this is that Ikigai balance concept. You have to be able to balance all of these areas. You can design a perfect lens in the computer, and then when you go to manufacture it, it's impossible to make it because the tolerance requirements are so strict that if one part is slightly out of place, it will make a terrible lens. So it makes a worse lens than if you have a balanced lens. And that's really the core principle of an Atlas anamorphic lens, is how do we achieve all these things in balance and in harmony? So ultimately, why would anyone choose an anamorphic lens today? You get 2 fields of view for any given lens. So your perspective magnification is multiplied. Essentially, you can have a telephoto lens, like an 80mm lens, with a wide angle field of view. So you get the depth of field of that telephoto lens, but you get more picture in the frame. So a 2 times anamorphic, like an Orion series that's an 80, has the horizontal field of view of a spherical 40mm lens. So you get more story in any given frame. And another reason we tend to, as humans, most likely prefer a widescreen movie is that if we're fortunate enough, we have vision with both eyes. So binocular field of view means we naturally have something like a 2 times wider field of view horizontally than vertically. So we see more from the left and right. Widescreen films can be more immersive, just like those people in the 1950s were saying with the surround movie. And many of us as camera people and as audiences prefer some of the artifacts or tool marks left over as aberrations or engineering imperfections of an anamorphic lens. So why should anyone choose Atlas Lens Co.? This company was founded and built on the idea of the fact that we love lenses as camera people before anything else. And then we built our engineering around love for camera, love for people, and love for great artistry. We want to bring classic vintage lens characteristics to people, but with modern conveniences. We offer an amazing price to performance ratio, so you'll never find a lens that is as affordably priced or accessible, rentable, but with the quality that we offer. And we have that balanced characteristic, the Ikigai of lens manufacturing. And above all else, it's because we care more than anyone else. That's why we're here today. That's why we're here with you. And finally, we're building a bridge from the past of cinematography to the future of cinematography. And we hope that's what all of you are doing for cinematography and storytelling and humanity as well.